Welcome to the Humans of Hospitality podcast with me, Mark Cribb. And just a pretty short intro to this one. I've just had a catch up with JD, Jonathan Downey from Hospitality Union and London Union. So JD is the guy behind Milk and Honey, Street Feast, Dinerama, and all sorts of amazing venues up in London. And wanted to have a quick catch up with him. He's also been been the voice, I suppose, of some of the independent hospitality sector in the last couple of months, from setting up his little WhatsApp group that became a very big WhatsApp group and now has a website and is doing all sorts of stuff to help represent the views of independent hospitality to government, and has been behind specifically, I guess, national timeout. So this idea on 9 months rent-free for the hospitality sector, and doing that in a way that has some sort of government support, but also works for the landlords as much as possible and works for the tenants, and is probably realistically the most biggest thing after furloughing that can really help provide some sort of glimpse of hope for the future of hospitality in this country before the next quarter's rent is due. So with the legislation and the regs changing all of the time, I wanted to have a catch up with JD and just get the latest on that, and then we just chew the fat a little bit around what the future might look like, and masks and screens, al fresco dining, whether we can relax the regulations for people with outside space before inside space, what that might look like across the country. So because it's very time specific, I wanted to get it out same day. So please have a listen. I hope you enjoy it. As always, if you can support the podcast, go to humansofhospitality.co.uk, click on the Patreon link, and you can make a donation via the tip jar to keep us on the air, or sign up for our weekly newsletter. Okay, thanks so much. Enjoying the episode, and I'll be back with you soon. Okay, Jonathan Downey, thank you so much for coming back onto the podcast. Hugely appreciated. Where are you in the world, JD? Are you up in your office, or are you roaming the streets?
I'm in my new home office, which is in Dalston, and we're desperately trying to get out of the lease on our head office in Shoreditch at the moment. Our landlord there is just doesn't seem to understand the way the world's changed. Our rent and property rates, business rates there, are about £200,000 a year. That's a cost we could well do without. And so at the moment, I'm just working from home on my kitchen table with my business partner, Rick. Another colleague, Harry, comes around from time to time. And then we've got 2 or 3 other people sort of working remotely, occasional visits. But generally, I'm, pretty good position, actually, because I've got a nice little garden, got a gym out the back. Harry, one of the guys I work with, is into his CrossFit. And so we do this Harry's boot camp 5 days a week, which is great every morning. Amazing. And I just did yoga for an hour today as well. So feeling all right.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, after a healthy salad lunch and some watermelon for dessert.
Oh,
there you go.
That's not the JD that we know. Where's the cocktail quaffing kind of, beer swill? I thought you looked well when I saw you doing an interview online the other day. I thought, you're looking fit and healthy, which is good, because you've somehow become the sort of national, representative of independent hospitality, I suppose, somehow, maybe slightly accidentally, maybe slightly on purpose in the last few months. So thanks for what you're doing. Since we last had a catch up, when we did that, Hospitality Union didn't necessarily exist in its current guise. Can you just talk a little bit about that and what made you set it up, and who the members are and what it's for?
Yeah, sure. So, you say a representative. Accidentally and to a large extent, regrettably. And I don't feel as though I represent anybody. I just feel like I am almost like a funnel for the views of a lot of people. So, for instance, I posted something on the WhatsApp group. So we set up this WhatsApp group. I set up this WhatsApp group on the 16th of March, which was the same day that Boris had said to everyone to avoid pubs, clubs and theatres and other social venues. And it was just in the afternoon of that. It was in the morning of that day. And prior to that, I'd just been individually texting, WhatsApping all mates and people in the industry that I knew. And it was just taking me too long. So I put them all in one group. I think I invited 250 people in the end, just people I knew in the industry. And everybody joined and everybody stayed. And then it grew to another group. And we've now got over 3,000 people. And most of them are either known to me or known to existing members, or they've kind of been semi-verified by my colleague Julia as being business owners in hospitality, senior operators, or they work in the press or property or PR or something, or recruitment or something related to our industry. And so, as I say, over 3,000 people in there now. I get hundreds of messages sometimes thousands of messages each week, loads of feedback. I think, there's an organization called the Independent Restaurant Coalition that was set up in the US in the immediate aftermath of what's been happening with this virus. And we're a little bit similar to that. I think we represent a broader spectrum of hospitality operators than perhaps anyone else here or elsewhere, just because it's a sort of a ragtaggle group of, individuals and others who've all interested in what's going on and want to share and stay up to date with things. So it's been really useful for me to hear everyone's position and opinions, and I try and cut out and edit down a lot of it and then just trying to pass it on as a kind of like very unique, I suppose, voice, but also to some extent unified voice. And when I think I'm about to say something that could be controversial, I'll usually sense check it with the group, and I get loads of messages back saying, no, I think you're right, or, well, I wouldn't do that, I don't agree with that. And then, I'll tone it down a bit, or I'll, etc. So I think, a good independent voice is I think is the right way of saying it. Although I don't really feel like I'm representing anybody else directly. I think if I did, I would have to behave differently. I want to be allowed to say what I think is the right thing to say. I want to be allowed to take positions on things and be opinionated if need be. I'm not some kind of organization or body that has a reputational risk issue or needs to be controlled or considered in some way or needs to have a consensus, So it's a bit more of a free, independent voice, I suppose, in that respect.
Yeah, it feels a little bit, not rebellious is probably the wrong word. Excuse me, but yeah, it's definitely got a bit of personality, and I think represents, the sector well, because the other side of our sector, I suppose, is the giant globals, the Hiltons and the Compasses and the big guys. But it feels like a much more, smaller operators, smaller owners who are really in the thick of things, I suppose, with this pandemic, and maybe the financial implications are, perhaps more personal than just having, big boards of shareholders. I'm sure there's a mixed group in there, but as well as the WhatsApp group, which has been brilliant, and you are a conduit for sort of fast information, and your access to some of the press contacts and getting the name out in the press has been brilliant. But also built a website, also have been writing to the government. You wrote to them. I think National Time Out was one of your key campaigns. You had something like 20 signatures on that letter that represented a lot of people, and you've started doing video. So has it morphed into more than you expected it to, I suppose, when you started as a WhatsApp chat?
Yeah, I did. I think we became much more of a campaigning sort of like thing that wasn't, again, originally the plan. It was just more of a loud voice. We've also, I think, looked at ways of getting a bit more structure to it, because I was just being overwhelmed with too much messaging and requests, and people were, at the beginning of all this, people were terrified. Before the JRS, before some of these other measures, business owners were just terrified because they had the most to lose. If you've got one cafe or two pubs, you're losing everything if we don't get some of these things sorted out. It's not just a question of a drop in revenue, or a reduction in dividend, or a bonus, loss of bonus. These people are losing their entire livelihoods. And I was really motivated from the outset to save jobs. That's what was kind of getting me out of bed earlier than I've ever been in my life before. And it was really stimulating, I think. So it's become a bit more structured and a bit more organized. It's still really just me. I've got Gemma Bell helping with the PR. But she's got lots of other things to do as well. Matt Sanders was working with me for a while, but he's had to go ultra part-time now. He can do a few hours a week. It's all been completely funded by me at the moment. I think I'm about £35,000 in the hole with all the graphic design, the video stuff, Gemma, Matt's time, etc. So I need to think about how long I can maintain that for, but I'm not worried about that at the moment. I just want to try and get this national timeout sorted and a deal done on rents before the rent apocalypse at the end of June happens.
Yeah, perfect. Well, there were some really big things, and some of them, with your voice and others, were achieved really quickly. So, the furlough scheme was an absolute game changer. We had the sort of moratorium, I guess, on rent and insolvency. But let's start with timeout, because that's one of the reasons I wanted to get an update. So, you've been particularly good, I suppose, at turning what was a very loose idea a couple of months ago into a thing. It's got a strap line. There's been a lot of people now using that sort of national timeout. You've had a lot of very famous chefs and restaurateurs all back in it. So it looks like it's got some huge momentum. What's the latest, and what are your sort of levels of confidence, I suppose, on getting the result of that?
Free. So I knew that at the outset, but this is our opening shot. This is our opening request. This is a negotiation with government regarding tenants and landlords. And so I think I'm glad we've got national timeout now on the agenda. It's on, it's online, it's everywhere. It's on TV, it's in print, it's become the thing. And there's been some great big voices in our industry saying it. I loved listening to Al Murdoch, CEO of Burger King, mention it 3 times on Newsnight, a couple of weeks ago. It's good that that's happening. And now we need to get to grips with the detail of what it means. I thought that Treasury would come back with some issues and some questions, some concerns. And lots of that has been fed back to me informally, in the way that a lot of things were dealt with a few weeks ago with the JRS, with lease forfeiture moratorium. I've kind of got this informal, sort of feedback system where, and I respond to that. But that's just not happened and the reason is rent solution has not been a priority for government these last few weeks. That's changed in the last few days, and it will be the new priority in the next few weeks, because something has to be done. Otherwise, 50% of businesses and 2 million jobs will be lost. So I'm confident. I'm extremely confident. I'm very confident. I couldn't really be more confident. I guarantee something has to be done. It's self-evident, isn't it? Something has to be done by government to sort a rent solution needs to be delivered. Otherwise, 2 million jobs are lost. Government won't allow that to happen. What that looks like, we don't know yet. I've got a very good idea of what it could look like, and now it's a negotiation. And if I could just say also, Mark, the negotiation is not being helped by some of the new voices that have been coming into this conversation recently with their thoughts about what things could look like. We don't need 20, 30, 50 different people negotiating this deal for us. We need 1, 2, or 3 who are all on the same page, okay? And I'm included in those 1, 2, or 3. And UK Hospitality and Kate Nichols is included in those 1, 2, or 3, and maybe some other people too. But we all need to get behind the same bus, and there needs to be one lead negotiator, and we need to push for the best and most reasonable deal, the most achievable deal we can, that does the best for the most. And that is what I'm trying to do over the next few weeks.
Good. And it's one of the reasons why I wanted to have a catch up with you, because it's been driving me bonkers as well. There's obviously various localized kind of WhatsApp groups or membership groups, and I'm in a couple down here in the south, and you see these conversations. Even this morning, people were kind of putting out there, we're going to arrange a meeting together so that we can, go to the council, for example, as a sort of a tenant or as a landlord to a number of us, and start negotiations. And sometimes you feel like, are you missing this? Surely our best hope at the moment is to all stand behind this national timeout and not splinter and not go off and do all different things. I had somebody else writing about, our best case scenario is to get, 3 months 50% or 3 months free. And you're sure every time I'm kind of like, national timeout. It's being worked on. So I think maybe people are starting to panic because we're coming closer to the next quarter, and they're feeling that they need to go out and negotiate. Personally, I'm kind of like, how on earth do you negotiate currently, for anything that's worse than 9 months, because we don't know what reopening is going to look like. If the regs come out that say that it definitely is 2 meters between each table, and you are going to lose 70% of your covers, it's so unviable that what's the point of negotiating a rent reduction at this stage? Because surely at that point, if you can't even open the doors, it has to be 9 months rent free. So I share that, and thanks for continuing to bang the drum. The biggest question you always get is how do the landlords cope with this? Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's quite difficult to explain with words and without pictures, but I'm produced an illustration, and I'll try and talk through it now, but I can't guarantee it'll make any sense.
Well, if you send it to me, I'll pop it in the show notes as well. But yeah, talk through it.
Basically, if you're most landlords, certainly on commercial premises, are borrowed against the security of the premises they're letting to hospitality businesses. Typically, that's about 60 to 70% of the value of the premises. So if you look at, for instance, as an example, a building, a site that's let to a restaurant or a bar or a pub operator for £120,000 a year, and we ask for 9 months rent-free, on the face of it, that's £90,000 of rent, of income that landlord has lost. Except it's not, because he will have borrowed, that landlord, he or she, that company will have borrowed a significant amount of money, depending on the value of that. And they're probably paying, I don't know, £80,000 a year of interest secured on those premises that they're getting £120,000 of income from. So if you give that landlord a 9-month repayment break, that's £60,000 of interest they don't have to pay for the 9 months. So they're not losing out on the 90,000. They're losing out on 90,000 minus 60,000. They're only losing out on £30,000. Okay, and that's fundamentally what people who are suggesting that tenants need to share the pain and that we need to find a middle ground don't understand. Those are the maths of most commercial premises that hospitality operators, operate in. So they're not missing out on their 90,000. They're missing out on 30,000. And then you go further up the chain, the bank is also taking a margin, and it will take a hit, a small hit. And the people who provide the money to the bank, that's people who put bank deposits, bondholders, the Bank of England, they'll be taking their slice. And it's about spreading it all out. And that's been the plan from the outset that I've not been very good at communicating, because it is quite complicated. And I have tried to talk this through with some very big brains, including some Harvard economics graduates. And it still is quite hard to get your head around, which is why I've tried to turn it into an illustration or a kind of like an example. And I think if the penny drops on that for a lot of people, and then I think, and government especially, then I think more people will get behind the idea, and more people will see that actually 9 months rent-free or something not too far off from it is quite achievable, and it's reasonable. But, more importantly, it's what's needed for these hospitality businesses to survive. And if they don't survive, they won't carry on being rent-paying tenants much longer,
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and it seems pretty clear. But yeah, send the illustration. There's also this point, and are you still referring to this about the idea of adding the 9 months on to the end of people's leases? Has that proved more complicated? Or?
Yeah, I think here you have to give the power to the landlord. So if the landlord, and again, that idea came from me getting feedback from some of the Hospitality Union WhatsApp group to say some guys had agreed to 6 months rent-free in return for 5 years added on to the end of the lease. People are negotiating deals like that individually. So that's one idea. The other idea is, and this depends on the length of lease. So, for instance, at my site in Canary Wharf, I think I've got 7 years left. I could get 9 months rent-free, and then I could spread out that 9 months or part of it over the remaining term of my lease, in the way that I've just applied for a 3-month mortgage repayment break on my house, and that 3 months is then spread out over the remaining term of the mortgage, which I think is about 11 years. That's manageable. So there's there's different ways of doing it, and I think you give that option to the landlord to decide what they would prefer, whether they prefer the extension to the lease or whether they prefer it to be spread out over the term of the lease. Dinorama, for instance, I don't want it spread out over the remaining terms of my lease there, because I've only got 2 years, and we're paying £450,000 a year rent. So I don't know what 9/12 of £450,000 is, but I don't want that spread out over the next 2 years of the lease, because it's just
It's a lot.
It's a lot. It's too much. So there are edge cases and there are details that it would be too boring to go into now, Mark. But there are ways we can deal with everything. Pretty much, we can deal with everything.
So, what's your hope or strategy with the government then? That they provide a sort of I suppose a framework for this kind of negotiations, where it's almost like, look, you've got option A, B, C, or are you hoping that they're going to be very specific, or do you expect people to negotiate different deals with different landlords?
What I would like them to do is like what they did with the JRS and just take the big idea. You know what we're going to do? We're going to put everyone who needs it on furlough, and we're going to pay them 80% of their, or a massive percentage of what they would be earning, to keep employees next to businesses so that we can reopen and bounce back at some point in the future. That's the big idea, right? This is just the same. That's why I called it a big idea in the letter to the Chancellor. Here's the big idea. Please come up with something. It won't be perfect, but you did a brilliant job with the JRS. Why not do a brilliant job with a national timeout? And in the meantime, we should be campaigning for the best deal we can get, not because we're being greedy or we're trying to take advantage, but because this is what we need to keep going. Landlords need us to stay in business. The ones that are kind of up to speed on this, understand that. There are a few absolute fucking idiots who just don't seem to get it and are just holding on, especially in London, where if your tenant goes out of business, you're probably going to find someone to take over the site, especially in central London. We've seen these people at Criterion Capital and these dumbwits at the Landlords Union that was set up. I don't know if you saw that in the press.
I did, yeah. I presume that was directly aimed at you.
What a bunch of scoundrels, and kind of like they were like straight out of central casting villains and like weirdos, weren't they? But that's what I would prefer government to do. I think what UK hospitality has been asking for is a summit meeting, which is a good idea as long as I'm at it. And I really don't want, and I hesitate to say this, but I have to say this: UK hospitality cannot be negotiating this deal for everybody who owns a hospitality business in the UK. They cannot be negotiating it. They have got a very too narrow a remit from their members, from their board and from their council to represent the whole industry. So I'm very happy, and it's very important that they are there. It's key that they are there, but they cannot be the sole negotiator for everybody in hospitality in the UK. And I'm sure that won't be the case.
Yeah, how is that? I mean, it looks from the outside that you two complement each other very well, I suppose, because I think you represent a slightly different demographic and a different side of the market. Is that recognised, and is that relationship sort of healthy?
I think Kate is great, and I've said it from the outset. I think, and I don't really want to get into what I think about everything else to do with UK hospitality. I've already said probably a bit more than I want to. I just, there's some great people on that council. I only know one person on the board that is great, and I think what Hospitality Union is doing is raising the profile of our industry in a different way, campaigning in a different way, and also, I hesitate to say represent, but is a voice for, a huge part of a different sector of our industry. We're acting for, we're not acting for, so that's the wrong phrase. We are listening to and a megaphone for the tenants of pubs, not the pubcos that own them, and there is a big difference in interest there. Not surprisingly, the pubcos didn't want a national timeout, don't want a national rent-free, want to take the grant money from tenants that were under the £51,000 rateable value threshold, to pay rents for the period of lockdown. And not every pubco, but a lot of them. And I just think that's bonkers,
That was a very tactful answer. Well done, JD. Yeah. I'm impressed. I think what you represent, and you alluded to this just now, is that some of the people, and as you say, you don't represent them, but you're a channel, I suppose, of our energies and our fears and our aspirations. Is that for many of us, businesses that we've built up over 10, 15, 20 years longer, our houses, our cars, these are literally on the line. And with some of the bigger groups, it is a board of directors and it is a balance sheet and it is some shares and it's fluctuations in short-term annual profits. But I think where we want you, around that table is that some people don't recognize just how fucked it is and that we will not be here, by significant margins if we don't get some sort of significant response. And I've been the same, when I was telling people in the early days a couple of months ago, I think more people are getting it now, but I was like, look, now is not the time to negotiate. Most of you don't realize just how shagged this industry is going to be for quite some time. And if we don't think bigger, it's no good going in and asking for 2 months or 6 weeks or something like that. It won't be enough, particularly anywhere in the sort of tourist areas. I'm all right at the moment. I'll get through the summer on a personal level, but how on earth we get through the winter, both in the fact that there won't be so much alfresco space and what will people be thinking, but we just cannot make enough money, in the summer to get through the winter. So I think if you know that you're not going to have anywhere to live and you're that motivated, then you want somebody sat around the table who kind of, shouts a bit louder and demands a little bit more with a bit more passion, I suppose. And you do that very well, JD.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'll carry on doing it then.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm going to move off this topic very shortly. So last one, the government response so far on that, then does it feel like you're pushing on an open door and like you say, this is about to be the next priority?
Yes, I was told that yesterday. So and they're all over it. I know who's read it. I know who's given it to. I don't want to mention any names. I was being fed stuff in the early days, and on a no names basis, and you're not allowed to mention. And and I just don't want to spoil that channel.
No, perfect. It's good enough for me that if you say, be patient, I think was the key message.
I don't want to compromise those channels. And I think, and listen, UK hospitality has done an absolutely fantastic job at getting into a direct link and a very influential link into government. We are recognised as a key industry now. They listen to us, and it's been incredibly effective. That merger of the ALMR and whatever else it was that made UK hospitality has had outstanding results, and you can see for yourself in the last few weeks with what's been achieved. So it's we can all take some comfort from that. I'm just a bit concerned that perhaps the full spectrum of interests isn't being represented, and so I've got to keep my eye open on that and sort of like champion the little guy sometimes when perhaps that's they're not really a priority.
Absolutely. I think you need both. I think, you complement each other really well. One's, got that legacy and that, many years of relationship and history. And to be fair, you're the same. It's much better to keep doors open and keep communications open and for people to work together. But at the same time, it's okay to be vocal and to press and push a little bit harder than maybe other people wouldn't. I think most people recognize that, isn't it? You don't want everybody just to be nodding and smiling in the room. So yeah, I think you're walking the line well, JD. You mentioned yesterday some moving away from rents, and hopefully we can, maybe catch up again in a few weeks, or hopefully there'll just be a national solution, and that will be enough for us. But the other thing that came out yesterday was the insolvency bill. I know you'd been speaking about that again for the last couple of months. That was going to be the other big issue. Is there's lots of restaurant groups, hospitality groups who owe people sometimes big amounts of cash, sometimes little bits of cash, and could easily be pushed into insolvency far too early. I know you read it or tried to. I know it's complicated, but can you give us any kind of update on how that's progressing and what more needs to be done?
Well, I've been shouting and begging for a debt enforcement moratorium since March the 18th, and it's been on my list of 6 things that I thought we needed as an industry to see us through this. And it's the only one of the 6 that they've not come up with yet. It's been long promised. I think it's 6 weeks ago now, the business secretary, Alok Sharma, said it was coming. The delay is because this is going to be permanent legislation. This has become UK law for a long time. It's not just a temporary coronavirus bill type legislation. So they've had to get it perfectly right. And so forevermore, a lease forfeiture moratorium is now going to be part of UK law, which is good in one respect. It means that if you are a struggling tenant, and your landlord is threatening to repossess and change the locks, etc., you can now apply for a company moratorium, which will give you 20 days to propose a rescue plan. That 20 days is extendable if you need more. It's a court-driven process, which is a bit boring, which means you probably need a lawyer or an insolvency practitioner to help you draft it. And if the rescue plan is reasonable and approved by the court, then it's binding on creditors, and there are all sorts of details on that. What it's not, though, it's not a debt enforcement moratorium, and I can't see it as such at the moment. And the reason I wanted a debt enforcement moratorium is because that would have given landlords the breathing space they needed, the break they needed to provide rent-free for tenants. So when I initially asked for a lease forfeiture moratorium, which I think was number 3 on my list, number 4 was a debt enforcement moratorium. The two needed to go together because that would have helped landlords agree immediately rent-free deals because of they wouldn't be paying their interest, they wouldn't have to repay their loans. There's be this kind of moratorium on that, and that's not appeared, as far as I can see, in this new legislation, which is a big disappointment. So it's not a full tick on my list. It's kind of like a third of a tick. And I don't really know where that leaves us come the end of June, when the existing lease forfeiture moratorium runs out. We've expected that would be extended, since day one pretty much, and we still hope that it will be. I'm a little concerned that them now bringing in this 20-day company moratorium, which includes a lease forfeiture moratorium, might mean they won't extend the general national moratorium. But, maybe that's not the case. But if it is the case, that's a big problem for a lot of people.
And just to explain what that means that let's say is it the end of June the current one runs out, and that literally then landlords can turn up 48 hours later and take possession of a premise. Is that how it works at the current?
It depends on the lease, but it's usually a month or 21 days later. If you've not paid your rent, if you've been told you need to, then they can just change the locks and repossess the premises. And again, it's a particular problem in cities where you've got valuable premises on high footfall sites. And there's this kind of like this land grab, this rush to take back premises that have had multi-million-pound fit-outs, etc., etc. It will also be an issue if you own a beautiful pub in the countryside in Norfolk or in Yorkshire, and you've been running it and taking and making money there, and your landlord's a bit of a dick, and he loves your business and would love to get hold of it, but you can't pay your rent, and they can change the locks, and all of a sudden they own it. They stick a manager in, and they're not only are they getting their rent, they're also getting all the profit. The person who spent the last 5, 10, their entire life building it up into a brilliant business, So that's what I'm trying to stop. That's why I thought we needed a lease forfeiture moratorium in the first place. And it's why we needed extending beyond the end of June to at least the end of September, so we can agree a national timeout, or ideally till the end of the year.
Yeah. And I think this is my fear as an operator as well, and I'm sure I reflect lots of other people, is I've spent £1 million on a restaurant. It's a great location because it's right on the seafront, and there'd be plenty of people, I can't pay my rent at the moment. It's not a won't pay, it's a can't pay. We were living on fumes coming out of the winter into our summer season, but the fear is that the council could easily rent that to somebody else with bigger pockets. They could sit there and go, look, even if we're not allowed to open for the next 2 years, I could spend a couple of $100,000 just sat on that restaurant, leave it closed, but when it reopens, I've still got £1 million restaurant for 200k basically. And that's the catastrophic sort of scenario that we're currently facing, presumably. Yes,
exactly that. Same with me. I spent £2 million on Giant Robot in Canary Wharf. Can't pay the rent there. It's £900,000 a year rent and rates on that site. So that's a big cost that it's just not worth reopening there this year at all. I don't think. I don't know how many people are going to go back to work in the office in the tower blocks in Canary Wharf to make it worthwhile our reopening there, for the next 18 months maybe. And Milk and Honey, the site I've had in Soho for 18 years, paid nearly $4 million in rent there. Landlord wants 100% of the rent, no rent free, no break, no nothing. The only concession is that I can pay monthly in advance. So, without the lease forfeiture moratorium, without, all these protections that we've now got, that's all gone. That is a very valuable late license site in Soho where there have been no new late licenses for, I think, 18 years now. I think that license was probably worth £1.5 million, £2 million before this virus hit us. And it could all just be taken off me. I doubt very much whether we'll reopen Milk and Honey. The only thing I can do there is surrender the license so that my land grabbing wanker landlord doesn't get the benefit of it, and I'll have to do that. So
I think it's it's heartbreaking when you hear stories like that. Just because Milk and Honey's got such a phenomenal reputation, such a legacy. It's been there for so many years. It was so much of the cocktail revolution, I suppose. And yeah, for things like that to go under at times like this is a sad state of affairs. Yeah, purely just through a lack of understanding. It's not difficult to comprehend the level of the challenge, but also, like you say, the comparative little amount of support that it needs. 9 months rent free, and it could all be so different. It's just bonkers, isn't it? Okay. Well, look, I don't want you to start getting any more angry. So let's move a little bit into what reopening might look like. You mentioned then about whether it will be worth opening at all. So a lot of people are starting to look to that. And is it al fresco dining, for example? Is it dine inside? UK Hospitality, I think it was yesterday, brought out their sort of Fare for Hospitality report. It's a 75-page document. I've not had a chance to read it yet. Have you had a chance, or have you got any thoughts on it?
Well, I would have liked to have seen it before it was sent into Treasury, and I'm very disappointed that I wasn't given a chance to chip in and perhaps comment. But it's gone now. I've not read the whole report. I haven't got time to read 75 pages. One of the first things I would have said was, does it really need to be 75 pages? Does it really need to be that detailed? I think it's a mistake to be doing things like demonizing salt and pepper pots. I know we're trying to help with the idea of removing salt and pepper pots, and I know that the infection can be passed that way, but I do think we've got a massive issue now with this kind of like new project fear of people being frightened of coming to venues, bars, restaurants, wherever it is. And we've got to stop making things like salt and pepper pots dangerous, or one-use menus, etc. Yes, they're all helpful, and if a business wants to do that, if they want to shout about that's what they're doing, they should be allowed to do it. But as far as I think, it's the wrong message. I think saying 1 meter distancing, we'll accept that is the wrong message. But this is probably not the time to go into that, Mark. I think a much better message would be smaller capacity venues shouldn't be required to have any kind of distancing because it's just not. It just doesn't work. And if the R value is down as low as it is in London at the moment, and that continues or remains the case, if, as we've seen in Austria, which relaxed its lockdown on April the 14th, there's been no second spike, there's been no new wave. If, as it seems, although this could change, the virus is just petering out. If, as we seem to know now, the outside seating, outside infection is negligible, then why are we talking about 1 meter distancing outside? Why are we talking about 1 meter distancing if it's a 10-person terrace? I don't think we should be volunteering these new measures because they will remain with us and a long time, and only well-resourced, well-funded organizations are going to be able to survive if you put these in place. So yes, they might work for McDonald's, but no, they don't work for Milk and Honey, So I think that there needs to be an acknowledgement, and I think there generally is, that it's different strokes, so we'll see where we end up. But we need to get opening safely and phased outside areas, especially immediately. I've got no idea why things can't be open in the next few days. People will be ready to go. Maybe not with food, because we've got supply line issues and workplace issues about people working in kitchens and proximity and safety there. But a couple of people or one person behind the bar working by themselves in a pub with an outside, on pavement space or beer garden, let's get it open. Let's allow people to make their own choices about whether they want to go there or not, in the way that they're making their own choices about whether they go to the beach or not, in the way that they're making their own choices about whether they go and sit in the park or not with other people, in the way that they make their own choices about whether they go to the supermarket or not. Let people make their own choices now. We have never been so well informed about something as we are about COVID-19. We are able to make our own choices now. The reason we weren't allowed to make our own choices was because we didn't want to overwhelm the NHS. We've got through that. We've achieved that. What is the reason now we're not being allowed to make our own choices? I don't know. And government needs to tell us, or government needs to allow us to a gradual, phased, safe reopening before the 4th of July. Why do we need to wait another 6, 7 weeks, whatever it is? That's crazy. And I've said it a few times. Hospitality, we are experts in food safety. We are experts in customer safety. We can be trusted. We've got initiative, innovation. We care about people. We spend our lives looking after people. We might not be NHS or care workers, but we do look after people, and we really know what we're doing, and we can be trusted with it, and they should allow us to get on with it within, a reasonable framework, within some phased controls, and without the need to, demonize salt and pepper pots.
Yeah, I agree. I think safety-wise, you look at, we sell a lot of shellfish on the beach. You look at salmonella, you look at chicken, you look at undercooked pork. Every day we have the life and death of our customers in our hands. If we don't follow processes, you're putting something in your body. We don't talk about this kind of stuff. It's just expected that you trust us not to poison you, but we could very easily. But of course we don't, because we love our customers, and everybody's trained in food hygiene and EHO. We are, in many ways, I would have thought, next to kind of care and the sort of NHS and health, such a clean environment to operate, because we've got to look after your health and your well-being. So I agree, some trust is required. And actually, we've reopened our takeaway, and it's interesting, takeaways have been able to open all the way through this, but our one specifically is on the seafront, and it didn't feel right in the fact you would only be on the beach if you were going out maybe for your hours daily exercise, and clearly you couldn't really have a beer or a slice of pizza if you were exercising. But as soon as Boris said, it's okay, you can go and sit in the sun, we're like, well, brilliant. And not only is it okay, but actually encouraged, and we're right on the beachfront. And we looked at the regs for the kitchen, which was particularly complicated, but actually it is 2 meters where possible, and there are some recommendations when it's not possible, and it's about working in bubbles, and it's about trying to set up stations so that you're not facing each other, but that you're next to each other. We've put little alarms that go off in the kitchen every 25 minutes that insist on a clean down. We've got a counter that the public come up to, which is cleaned visibly in between every single customer. You're called forward one at a time, and we sanitize each time. You're given little buzzers to come back and pick up your food, so you don't need to wait in the queue, and those are sanitized in between each. And this isn't because somebody wrote it down and regulated it and made it overly onerous. We just sat there and used our brain for our specific circumstances and said, look, this is the best that we can do. And I do worry sometimes that we make things more complicated than they need to be, with the right intentions. And like you say, and some of the big groups who will be worried about their insurance and their teams and being sued, I suppose, maybe need that structure to say, well, look, we did all of this and therefore we're okay. But in our sector, most teams often work together 10, 15 years. It's a tight little unit. They want to get back to work, and we don't want to harm them. We've all got kids, we've all got grandparents, we want to look after each other. But let's not make it more complicated than it needs to be.
No, you should take a little video of what you do each time you serve a customer. That's fantastic. All those protocols and measures that you make it, and speed it up 30 seconds and just say, look, this is what we do as an industry. This is how we do it. People don't realize, and, we've got to find new ways of communicating clearly, how good we are, how brilliant that is that you're just talking about there. I mean, I wouldn't have gone to those lengths, but, you then learn from others and think, shit, we better up our game. These guys are kicking ass at sanitizing and cleaning down and etc. And I think you're seeing it. I think Pret have done a great job with their screens, and they've got reopen. And it doesn't feel weird or that weird going into a Pret and there's somebody standing behind a Perspex screen. It would feel very weird if you walked into my local boozer and somebody's standing behind a Perspex screen. But, I think we do what we can where we can, and what we'll do will be absolutely brilliant and innovative and, world leading again, like we have been for years.
Yeah, and I do think the public will decide on what level of risk they're comfortable with. I mean, back in the early days, we're seeing those sort of, people sat almost in plastic Perspex cubes in China, and everybody was wearing masks. And I looked at that and I was like, my God, I would rather not go out for dinner than go and sit in that kind of environment. That's just not hospitality as we do it. But I think that doesn't stop us from doing a lot of things, like you say with the salt and pepper shakers. Why not just clean the salt and pepper shakers in between each service rather than insisting that they're not there? Surely there are other ways of doing these things, and then, like you say, communicate it with the public. I did see that the government do recommend that you do a sort of COVID-19 risk assessment for your individual premise, and that you publish that premise to your that risk assessment to your team, but also you put it on the website and you show it to your customers. And I think as a customer, if you went and looked on that and went, yeah, I'm happy with that level of risk or level of safety, or I'm not, some people will want to go to a chain like a Pret because they'll believe they've followed the 75 pages of rules and regs, and other people will go, you know what, I want to go and support my local independent pub, and I've read what they've done and I'm happy with that. And we do need to give people the responsibility to act like grown-ups, I suppose.
Exactly. There is a bit of a concern, I think, without having read it in great detail, that some of these, fine for 5,000 employees businesses, we need these rules clearly defined by government so that we can operate and we can say to our 5,000 employees, this is how we've got to do it, guys. Are going to be imposed on everybody. And, that's not a good thing. We've got to make sure that you can be allowed to do your thing in the way that's best for your business and your people and will work for your customers. We've got to allow that room and not be, opening the door to all kinds of new rules and regulations. It happened in, nightclubs. If there's a stabbing on a council estate near a nightclub, then everyone's all of a sudden got to have metal detectors on the door, It's and then they've got to be there forever, and then you've got to have another security guard for this, and you've got to have a logbook for that, and it becomes more. It's more and more layers of unreasonable and in many cases unnecessary cost on a business that make it unsustainable, and we've just got to do and people have just got to be left to make their own decisions about what the best thing is, and like you say, and then the customer will decide.
No, agree 100%. That's what terrifies me is that, again, well-intentioned people come out of rules. Life happens in the grey areas. I'm all for grey area. I think actually, it depends on your maybe political or opinion or perception of risk. And I guess as self-employed entrepreneurs, we're probably not always the best people to ask because we've probably got a slightly higher risk strategy than some people, but we're not going to be forcing people to go out. But, I quite respect what Boris has said is, look, it's much easier to regulate when we can just say everybody stay at home, but it's much harder to come out with the nuances of what's safe and what's not safe and what you can do. And I do think we're going to have to just rely on people to be informed. And as you say, they are informed. That I was chatting to the council a couple of days down here in Bournemouth about reopening the toilets, and there was this debate about if we open the toilets on the beach, is that going to encourage people to come to the beach, and is that as a problem? And then the flip side of that debate was, well, people are going to come anyway, and if there's no toilets, that's going to be a huge health problem. And then they looked at are we going to need to man every toilet to insist that only sort of 2 people come in at a time, and they costed it up, and it was going to be £50,000 a week to man those toilets. And again, I think the business sector on the seafront was saying, look, please give people some common sense. Put some signs up that says only 3 people allowed in at a time. Draw some lines on the ground that says, don't over encroach these. And then it's management by exception rather than treating everybody as an idiot. And that's what we're going to need.
Yeah, definitely.
Good. All right. Well, look, I've taken up more time than I was planning, but thanks for that. I found it really useful. I just wanted to get an update. I'm going to not necessarily relax on the rent negotiations, but I'm not going to panic in the next couple of weeks, at least, I suppose, and hope there's some sort of solution. I'm still excited. I've done a couple of podcasts with some guests in Shanghai, actually, which was really interesting because they're obviously about sort of 8 weeks ahead of us, and it was interesting to hear the sort of level of fear, I suppose, when they first reopened and the local sort of police were coming in and they were checking there. It was a meter there, so they were checking there was a meter between tables. Everybody was being temperature checked, every delivery driver, every customer, every member of staff, and it was all having to be logged, and it was pretty onerous. And even within 8 weeks, there hasn't been a second spike. People are becoming more relaxed. It's not that they've changed the regulations; they're just not enforcing them. People are using their common sense, and it's not back to normal. But it was I suppose, made me a little bit more optimistic to hear that human beings are doing what human beings do and are going out and having some drinks. So hopefully there's a way through this, JD. But thanks for sparing the time. Is there any other particular topic that we've missed that you'd like to go over, or are you happy? Any support, I suppose, that people can give you? Send you some cash by the sounds of the cost of what it's doing.
Maybe at some point. I know I've had some beer sent to me by Camden Town. I was very grateful for that. A case of beer didn't last long, I have to say, once it got cold. And the people at Caravan have sent me some coffee, and that's kept me going. And no, I'm all right. I think I think we'll know a lot more tomorrow. We'll know a lot more next week. We'll have got a lot more next month, hopefully. And I think there'll definitely be some kind of solution. I just hope it's enough for enough people. Really, we'll see.
Yeah, likewise. All right, thanks, JD. We'll keep in touch. Appreciate your time.
All right, no problem.
Okay, there you have it. Very much hope you enjoyed our chat, and I'm always find it enjoyable catching up with JD and getting his opinion. And he's super energized, super motivated, very enthusiastic. Really wants to see an industry that he and I know many of you love succeed, and he wants to help save as many jobs as possible, which I think is great. And he's got some good ideas, and he's getting some getting some ears of some important people in government and helping represent us, which I think is fantastic. So fingers crossed things will continue to develop. It's a key time now, I think, as we look to trying to reopen and what that might look like, whether that's going to be economically viable, how many jobs we can save, how we survive the winter, alfresco dining, all sorts of stuff to come out hopefully in the next few weeks. And I'm sure I'll catch up with JD again in the future, as well as others around what's going on and what we can hope, strategize and plan for. If you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts, that would be fantastic. Really helps me out with the algorithms. And don't forget, go to humansofhospitality.co.uk to sign up for our weekly newsletter and support us via our Patreon page. Okay, thanks so much. See you again soon.